Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Thursday the 22nd of February. I'm joined once again this evening by William Duguid, the writer and activist with Person Kinross Yes Hub. Welcome once again, William,
Yeah,
and thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you for having me again, Brian. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. I want just to make sure I get your name right consistently through the show tonight. So
That would be
um,
good.
it would, yes. Ukraine update. Day 729. Vladimir Putin remains intent on trying to defeat and dominate Ukraine 2 years after launching an invasion that has caused more than 500,000 casualties, Western officials said in a fresh assessment of the war. However, Putin is not thought to have any clear-cut medium-term strategy. On Wednesday, the European Union approved its 13th package of sanctions against Russia. The new package, which will be formally approved in time for the second anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, will see nearly 200 entities and individuals added to the sanctions list. Three mainland Chinese firms were added to a list of companies that EU businesses were banned from dealing with, diplomats said. The firms, the first in mainland China to be targeted by the measures, were accused of involvement in supplying sensitive military technology to Russia. Firms in Turkey and India were also included, as the EU increasingly targets third countries for helping Moscow circumvent its sanctions. The EU also imposed an asset freeze and visa ban on North Korea's Defence Minister Kang Soon Nam for supplying ballistic missiles to Moscow, diplomats said. Iran has provided Russia with a large number of surface-to-surface ballistic missiles, deepening the military cooperation between the two US sanctioned countries. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said he believes the best way to honour the memory of Alexei Navalny was to ensure a Russian defeat in Ukraine. Andrei Morozov, a prominent pro-war Russian blogger, has reportedly died by suicide following outrage over a post in which he claimed that the Russian army lost 16,000 soldiers during the capture of the eastern Ukrainian city of Avdiivka. Russia's capture of Avdiivka has alarmed people in nearby towns, and many are now leaving for safer areas after hunkering down for months from constant fire, according to reports. On Wednesday, the Ukrainian army denied it had lost Krikny, its bridgehead on the Russian-occupied side of the Dnipro River, a day after Russia's defence minister said the area had been taken. Finland has said it has launched almost 800 investigations into potential sanctions breaches on its border with Russia in the 2 years since Putin invaded Ukraine. The border with Russia has recently been closed because of irregular migration, which the Finns believed was orchestrated by Russia from St. Petersburg. It has meant train and shipping transports are now the focus of sanctions enforcement in Finland. The BBC Russian service and news outlet Mediazona have confirmed the identities of about 45,000 Russian soldiers who died in Ukraine since the invasion began in February 2022. The issue of military casualties is extremely sensitive in both countries. Russia has banned criticism of the conflict, and no official figures have been released since 2022. William, was there anything that stood out in today's update for Ukraine?
It's kind of marking time a little bit as we get close to the second anniversary. I think that it's probably correct to say that Russia doesn't have a medium-term plan, and that probably means that things will carry on much as they are, but with no particular sign of Ukraine being able to resist the gradual advance, as we've seen with Avdiivka, unless and until whatever the European nations may do and what the UK may do, unless and until America really gets involved and really ups the funding to Ukraine and the supplies to Ukraine. But this is looking increasingly like a kind of messy stalemate, and it would be interesting to wonder if there's any move towards um, looking at what a peace settlement might resemble, because otherwise this will just grind on for ages. So that's quite a depressing outlook at the second anniversary. And the other thing to note, I think is the slight uneasiness in Finland about what's going on with the borders there, and that's always something to keep under review. But as I say, pretty much a marking time sort of thing. And post Avdivka, we're just letting that sort of settle, I think, before we know what happens next.
Thank you, William. I'm just going to be cheeky and ask you one more question which isn't included in the runner order, but it is relevant. But Finland is now part of NATO, which means that our border with Russia is now quite a bit closer in terms of NATO. And then today, I think there was the Russian Air Force was spotted out off the coast of Scotland and the North Sea. Do you think the two are related?
Um, Probably not, because I suspect that Russia's been close to Scotland quite a few times in that way. But yeah, Finland is very much in the game, as if you like, the frontier of NATO, which is something that Putin has never liked. The idea that NATO was getting closer and closer, in a sense, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. But I don't think at this point Putin is particularly making eyes at doing anything in or around Scotland.
Okay, thank you. And now the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 29,410 Palestinians have been killed and 69,465 injured in Israeli strikes on Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, the Gaza Health Ministry said in a statement today. The foreign ministers of 26 European countries on Thursday called for a pause in fighting, leading to a longer ceasefire. They urged Israel not to take military action in Rafah that would worsen an already catastrophic humanitarian situation. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that in North Gaza, 1 in 6 children under 2 years old is acutely malnourished, as he called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. He linked to a news release on the World Food Programme website, which highlighted the scarcity of food and safe water. It also said diseases are rife, compromising women and children's nutrition and immunity and resulting in a surge of acute malnutrition. A UN attempt to deliver 10 convoys of food aid to northern Gaza over 7 days was suspended earlier this week after trucks were looted by crowds. A driver was beaten and gunfire reported amid chaotic scenes. In a collective appeal, heads of UN humanitarian entities and global non-government organisations have implored world leaders to help prevent further deterioration of the crisis in Gaza. Israeli strikes in Gaza kill 48 as fears mount over humanitarian crisis. 7 Israeli strikes hit Rafah early today, one of them flattening a huge mosque and devastating much of the surrounding block. Another strike hit a residential home in Rafah, sheltering the Al-Shair family, killing at least 4 people, including a mother and her child. Strikes in central Gaza overnight killed 44 people, including 14 children and 8 women, according to hospital officials there. An Israeli bombing of a United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees, otherwise known as UNRWA, building in housing... I'll read that again. An Israeli bombing of an UNRWA, or United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestine refugees building, housing displaced people in the Jabalia refugee camp in the northern Gaza Strip, has resulted in casualties, according to Al Jazeera. Israeli media reported that there were clashes between security forces and Israeli protesters at the Kerem Shalom border crossing, where demonstrators have been attempting to blockade humanitarian aid entering Gaza. Tensions are rising in the West Bank ahead of Ramadan, which in the past has seen increased clashes, often in connection to restrictions imposed on Palestinian worshippers going to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem's Old City during the Holy Month. Israeli War Cabinet members Benny Gantz has said there are promising early signs of progress on a new deal to release hostages from Gaza amid regional talks to secure a pause in the war. Israel is seeking Palestinians who are not affiliated with Hamas to manage civilian affairs in planned humanitarian pockets of the Gaza Strip, designed as testing grounds for post-war administration of the enclave, a senior Israeli official said today, according to Reuters. Japan has had strong words for Israel in the opening of its oral submission at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, which is hearing further arguments today in the case legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. William, there was a lot there. Was there anything that you want to highlight?
Yeah, the, the increasing problem, and it will go on being a problem, is getting aid in such a way that it can be used. And we see that there is still a blockade, first of all, of protesters to try and stop aid getting in at all. But slightly more worrying is the fact that they had to abandon an attempt to get aid into northern Gaza because of looting and that says to me that people are absolutely desperate. And that is when you start to get to the tipping point where it doesn't matter what you do with aid, there is going to be an issue because people are just so desperate that they will try to grab it. And, you know, I can't really see an easy way out of that, even if there were a humanitarian pause tomorrow. And we also see that it's now having its effect, the lack of aid, the lack of resources, with 1 in 6 children under 2 in northern Gaza suffering from what Antonio Guterres describes as acute malnourishment. And that, I suspect, will be the tip of the iceberg. And to be thus affected at that early an age isn't going to be good. And it, it, it it's going to keep getting worse unless we really can break this cycle of violence and work out a way of making things better and getting people talking and getting some sort of stability back into the region. But it seems to me that we're much more interested, certainly in this country, in playing party political games than in making that stick. I think some of the other nations, the EU nations, 26 of whom have made a statement, are being a wee bit more forceful. But again, without the US really taking a hand, I don't see that this improves very quickly at all.
Thank you, William. You mentioned trying to make something stick when it comes to a ceasefire. Speaking of which, our next item is the fallout from last night's House of Commons debate on a Gaza ceasefire continued as Stephen Flynn, the SNP's Westminster leader, said that as a result of yesterday's debacle, the SNP does not believe that Sir Lindsay Hoyle should remain as Speaker. They do not have confidence in him. We've actually got a video clip that we'd like to show you in which Stephen Flynn talks about this.
Stephen Flynn, Leader of the SNP.
Mr Speaker, last evening we saw the best of this House and its ability to debate, and we also saw the worst of this House as it descended into farce. And I think I speak for everyone in the chamber just now, and indeed yesterday, when I expressed my deep sorrow that that was able to happen, given the content of what it was we were debating. Nevertheless, Mr Speaker, it descended into farce because of a decision that you made, and you alone made, to ignore the advice that was given to you by the clerks. In doing so, on the opposition day of the Scottish National Party, my colleagues and I were denied the ability to vote on a matter which is of grave concern to us and which over recent months we have sought to raise in this chamber at every available opportunity. It ultimately turned into a Labour opposition day. That, quite frankly, is not acceptable. And as I have expressed to you privately prior to proceedings here today, we do not, on these benches, therefore believe that you can continue in your role as Speaker. We do not have confidence in your ability to do so. So I would therefore welcome clarity, either from yourself or indeed from the Leader of the House, as to how we can best facilitate a vote in this chamber at the earliest possible occasion to that effect. Thank you.
So Stephen Flynn today in Westminster is explaining why he no longer has confidence in Mr Hoyle. In response, Hoyle said that he had made a judgment call that turned out to be wrong, and he apologised to the SNP. He justified his decision on what he called the absolutely frightening material he has been shown about the threat to MPs, and he stressed his commitment to keeping people safe. Sir Keir Starmer has defended his decision to lobby the Speaker over the Gaza debate yesterday. Starmer met Hoyle in person hours before the vote, arguing that the Speaker should ignore precedent and allow a vote on the Labour motion, but Starmer denies threatening the Speaker. Dozens of Labour MPs had been preparing to rebel against their party whip and vote for the SNP motion, calling for an immediate ceasefire. Hoyle's decision to allow a vote on the Labour amendment, which called for a ceasefire with caveats, averted a rebellion and took the pressure off Sir Keir Starmer. The Speaker's actions went against the advice of his clerk, who had warned that it was a departure from the long-established convention. The allegation that Starmer may have threatened Hoyle with the prospect of Labour not voting to reappoint him after the election if he did not back them yesterday was prompted by tweets posted by Newsnight's Nicholas Watt yesterday. By this morning, at least 59 MPs had put their names to a motion expressing no confidence in the Speaker. William, I believe that list of MPs joining to say that they have no confidence in the Speaker is now standing at 67. And you might be interested to know that the only MPs that are on that list are either SNP or Conservative. There's no other parties on there at all, as far as I can make out. With this early day motion in Hoyle, of no confidence in Hoyle, do you think he will be still in place, or is he going to have to step down?
It's difficult to be sure. There are some signs today, particularly in some of the statements that some of the Tories have made, that maybe the heat is being taken off a little bit, and the sort of way in which he's described his circumstances as looking after the safety of MPs may have rung a few bells there. I don't know how much validity it's got and why, in fact, it resulted in the decision that he made. I don't see how it factors into it, but nevertheless, he's claiming to have been looking after the safety and security of MPs, and that may have rung a wee bell. So it's difficult to be sure what will happen next. It's quite a number of people having signed the no confidence motion. If you compare it with, for example, Michael Martin in 2009, I think he resigned in anticipation of a no confidence vote after 23 MPs had signed a motion. So it certainly has a precedent for being very, very dangerous for Lindsay Hoyle. But I do get the impression that with what some of the Tories are saying, and indeed the non-committal nature of some of the other parties, that perhaps he might survive a vote. The question is whether he wants to subject himself to it.
Thank you, William. I think we should probably say that a lot of what we're going to be talking about this evening is going to sound a bit trivial compared to the fact that there's civilian deaths in Gaza, and we should note that there has been a motion which has been passed calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, Rishi Sunak today said that it was very concerning that Hoyle's decision to change the common rules and gave credit to the Speaker for his apology, and kind of implied that he's willing to draw a line under the Gaza ceasefire vote chaos. First Minister Humza Yousaf added his name to the list of those who say Hoyle should go. David Linden, SNP MP, predicted Hoyle will have resigned by the weekend, and we can check on whether that's happened on the Full Scottish, which I'm going to be hosting this Sunday. Do you think that people that are saying that the SNP shouldn't really be so concerned about their motion being stolen by Labour, and should really just be happy with the fact that there is now a ceasefire motion has been passed?
Well, it is very, very important that some sort of ceasefire motion has been passed, and that at least we're recognising that at the end of the day, this is about Gaza and the suffering there. And a lot of that got lost in all the fireworks last night. Of course, it's not something that commits the UK to anything, but it's at least a step along the way to actually working for a ceasefire. So, having said that, it's actually quite an important principle that needs to be emphasised, that the SNP gets, as second biggest opposition party, 3 opposition days when they can introduce a vote during the year, the parliamentary year. And one of these has been taken away from them by effectively handing it to a party, Labour, which itself has 17 during the year as the main opposition party. And if parliamentary, if you like, fairness in the parliamentary system, and I struggle to think of this in terms of the UK, but it's, you know, it's theoretically there. If that's to mean anything, I think you need to treat opposition days as they should be and give the party whose day it is the opportunity to have their vote on their terms. And Lindsay Hoyle ignored precedent and did not do that yesterday. Now, it may well be that he invokes something else to give the SNP a debate on Gaza. I think there is a Check's note, Standing Order 24, which would allow him to do so, and maybe that would be one way around it. But certainly the principle of opposition days needs to be observed, even if all the fireworks are well overshadowed by the actual tragedy that's going on in Gaza that we mustn't forget.
Hoyle did seem to be genuinely affronted when he came back into the chamber to give an account for himself, which Stephen Flynn had called for, saying, where is the Speaker? But so do you think there is a difference between opinion north and south of the border? Talking heads in Westminster, London-centric talking heads are saying that the SNP should just accept the outcome, whereas maybe people north of the border are feeling that the SNP, the party that they voted for in Westminster, is being sidelined, and that's going to make people angry.
I think it's very likely that people in Scotland will feel that, and I can see why, with the way the SNP and Scotland in general is regarded by the metropolitan elites, that maybe in England that isn't as much of a problem. But I get back to the fact that the principle that the opposition day party should have its vote, because it doesn't get very many of them, is pretty sacrosanct, and it didn't need to happen in this way. Labour could have introduced a vote on this any time it liked with one of its opposition days. So principles are important. We don't always see them maintained in Westminster, who all too often seem to make up the rules to suit the occasion. And this is just another example of that. So, yeah, I wouldn't say the SNP should just be satisfied. They should be careful what they do to object about it. And I thought, by the way, that Stephen Flynn looked very measured, as opposed to, he's extremely annoyed last night, and you could see that. But that was a very measured response. And I think that's the right way to go. And that does uphold the principle still.
Thank you, William. I mean, we're pushing the time here, but just very quickly, there's 2 theories that seem to be getting quite a bit of traction. One is that Hoyle's actions saved Keir Starmer from a huge defeat, the biggest since the vote on the Iraq War. But I've also seen people, or heard people saying that the only reason that the Conservative Party withdrew their motion was because they knew that this would be the outcome for the SNP, and so they did that on purpose. Do you think there's any truth in either of those theories?
I think there's possibly truth in the first. I think there was quite likely to be a largish Labour rebellion. Because, of course, it's always the principle that Labour doesn't vote for SNP motions. That's the main principle. That's there. And that was going to be disregarded. Strange to see that convention disregarded. As far as the Tories just doing this to stick it to the SNP, no, I don't think so. I think the Tories might have been afraid of keeping their own motion because people might be, in their party, might be more likely to vote for the Labour one than they were for the Tory one. So I don't think they were focusing on the SNP necessarily.
Yeah, time really is against us now, but I would say to viewers at home, if you haven't seen it, you should check it out, because there were a lot of both Labour MPs and Conservative MPs saying they were very annoyed to have been deprived of the opportunity to vote for the SNP motion. It really is quite incredible watching. But I better move on to the next item if we're going to finish on time tonight. In the Scottish Parliament today, Ivan McKee MSP led a debate calling for an immediate ceasefire in Israel and Palestine. The motion said that the motion said that the Parliament notes with concern reports of the recent upsurge in violence in Palestine and Israel, which, it understands, has seen more than 28,000 people, including mostly women and children, killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, 1,400 people killed by Hamas and other terrorist organisations in Israel, and more than 300 Palestinian civilians killed by Israeli armed settlers in the West Bank. The motion went on to say that it believes strongly that there is no justification for inflicting terror or killing innocent civilians, or for the taking of civilian hostages, and condemns violence in all its forms. It notes with concern what it considers to be the risk of disease and malnutrition in Gaza as a consequence of the Israeli blockade of the Strip, which it believes may itself constitute a breach of international law. It recognised what it saw as the critically important relief work of organisations such as the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, that's UNRWA, and Medical Aid for Palestinians, and notes that the UK government and others are being urged to continue to financially support this work. The motion added that it believed that this conflict did not begin on the 7th of October 2023 and believes that a lasting peace with justice will only come through a negotiated settlement, and calls for an immediate ceasefire in Palestine and Israel to allow diplomatic discussions to take place that will safeguard innocent civilians. The conduct of the debate was in marked contrast to the scenes in the House of Commons last night. William, I don't know. Do you think this will help on the ground in Palestine, combined with the vote in Westminster last night?
I don't think it will probably have any effect at all. I don't think either of the votes will. I think it's kind of out of the hands of both the Scottish Parliament and the UK Parliament what happens now, and entirely down to whatever negotiations may be going on for a ceasefire. And there have been signs from various people, including Benny Gantz, that there's maybe progress being made. Although what Benny Gantz regards as progress, I might not regard as progress. But I think it is, nevertheless, if it does nothing on the ground in Palestine and Gaza, I think it's important that the Parliament has its say. And I thought that was a very measured motion by Ivan McKee, and it ticks all of the boxes, and it mentioned the Gaza sufferers and also the hostages, and it mentions the West Bank, and that is as a measured thing. It also mentions the work of UNRWA, and that's very important because that's going to be struggling in a month if funding isn't restored by those nations that have withdrawn it. So I'm no expert in drafting emotions, but that looked a pretty good one to me.
Thank you, William. And it's probably worth mentioning that it's not the first debate in Holyrood that's called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. There was one back in November 2023, and of course that hasn't happened yet either. And just related, there was a row between MSPs erupted after a protest outside Holyrood looked to block people from entering the building to attend a wine reception held by weapons manufacturers. Stephen Kerr MSP criticised Ross Greer MSP for speaking at the rally, which I think shows a big difference between Conservative MSPs and Green MSPs. But yeah, as I said, time's against us. So the next item is a US intelligence assessment of Israel's claims that the United Aid Agency staff members participated in the Hamas attack on the 7th of October said some of the accusations were credible, but that the claims of wider links to militant groups could not be independently verified. Earlier this year, Israel accused 12 employees of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, of participating in the 7th of October attacks alongside Hamas. It also said 10% of all UNRWA workers were affiliated with Hamas. The bombshell accusations led several countries, including the United States, to cut off funding for the agency, which was a crucial vehicle for getting aid to Gaza in what has widely been described as a humanitarian crisis. According to the Wall Street Journal, the intelligence report released last week declared it had low confidence in the basic claim that a handful of staff had participated in the attack, indicating that it considered the accusations to be credible, though it could not independently confirm their veracity. The report cast doubt on accusations that the United Nations agency was collaborating with Hamas. The journal said the report mentioned that although UNRWA does coordinate with Hamas in order to deliver aid and operate in the region, there was no evidence to suggest it partnered with the group. It added that Israel has not shared the raw intelligence behind its assessments with the US. William, I'm just checking my notes. So UNRWA, but just by the way, was founded in 1949, after the 1948 Palestinian War, and it provides relief to Jewish and Arab Palestinian refugees inside the State of Israel following the conflict of 1948 until the Israeli government took over responsibility for them in 1952. I'm just searching for my question here, actually. The fact is that it said that the United States government withdrew funding to UNRWA when the claims were made. Am I right in saying that the British government withdrew funding also, but the Scottish government did not? Does that show you a difference between how Scotland and England's governments react?
Well, probably not as much as we think, because I think the Scottish government had sent, had given them as much assistance financially as they were going to give them for the year, because of course the Scottish government is limited in what it can do. So the Scottish government was never going to send them any more money at this year, but I think did speak in support of them at the time, that not just the UK and the US, but several other countries, I think up to, was it 9 or maybe 10 countries withdrew funding at the same time, very much as I think a knee-jerk reaction to the claims that were made, that are now seen to be perhaps not as credible as we thought they were. But in answer to your question, no, I don't think it. I think there is a difference between how the UK government looks at things and the Scottish government does in this regard, but this isn't an example of it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, William. The UK government ministers, ministers have vowed to press ahead with legislation to automatically overturn convictions related to the Post Office Horizon scandal by the end of July. Kevin Hollinrake, the Post Office Minister, said in a written ministerial statement on Thursday that the legislation would immediately quash the convictions of hundreds of post office operators in England and Wales. Hollinrake's statement said ministers aimed to pass the bill into law as soon as possible before summer recess. Responding to the announcement, the Scottish Government's Justice Secretary, Angela Constance, said, "The Scottish Government made it clear to the UK Government that we want to see UK-wide legislation to ensure there is a quick, fair and equal solution for all affected sub-postmasters." She went on to say, "We will introduce Scottish legislation if necessary, but it is likely that would need to be after a UK bill has passed to ensure full compatibility with UK legislation and the UK compensation scheme in which the Scottish Government has no locus." She continued, "Due to the reserved nature of some of the issues involved, there may be areas the Scottish Parliament cannot legislate on, and we will be relying on this further UK legislation. This will introduce additional time and complexity. In addition, the Scottish Parliament has no powers to compel UK ministers or the Post Office to provide evidence to Parliament. Our priority is to ensure full parity for everyone affected by this miscarriage of justice, which is why we will continue to strongly express that our preferred option is to use a legislative consent motion to extend any UK bill to cover Scotland." William, so because the Post Office is reserved to Westminster, it turns out now that Holyrood is going to have to wait for Westminster to finalise and pass a bill, and then Holyrood will have to match that bill, which will lengthen and complicate the whole process in Scotland. And this is all for a problem which was solely caused by Westminster. Would you agree with that summary? And well, I'll just leave it there. Would you agree with that summary?
Potentially, that's correct. I think it's within the powers of the UK, I mean the powers in general of the UK, to introduce legislation that can quite easily be extended to cover Scotland, and the legislative consent motion should, in those circumstances, be just the natural course of events. So it needn't create too much of a delay, I think. But the drafting of whatever way out of this there is important, because if it, for example, focuses on the post office as the prosecutor, which wasn't the case in Scotland, then there would have to be some form of legislation that paralleled it. It wouldn't be a simple legislative consent motion. So, like everything between the UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament, it can be done smoothly if it's intelligently drafted. But if it's not intelligently or cooperatively drafted, then there could be an extra little hump on the way. But I do believe that both parliaments are pretty well unanimous in thinking that we need to fix this for the postmasters as soon as possible. And I would hope that there wouldn't be any bumps in the road caused by that, and that through cooperation, it could be made as simple as possible.
So for those people who are affected by the fallout from this, as you say, the post office masters, or the sub post masters who've already waited a long time, some of whom have died without having been getting any compensation or being proven innocent. You don't think they should be concerned when they hear about this potential delay?
I think they should be concerned about the length of time this continues to take and all the twists and turns that it continues to take, despite the fact that there's near unanimity, certainly in the general public and by a lot of legislators, that this is a scandal and it needs to be fixed. And it's incredibly frustrating how slowly the wheels of justice grind on. So I don't think there's anything about this particular, if you like, the two parliaments having to work together on this that should make postmasters concerned, because they've got enough to be concerned about as it is. I really do hope that before too many people die without seeing their names cleared, which is very important for their families, but also adequate compensation and not the rubbish they've been offered. I really hope we get to that stage before very much longer, whatever the route is in Parliament.
Thank you, William. I've got Marion Fellowes, SNP MP's voice ringing in my head from what you were just saying there. But the next item is the Deputy First Minister, Shona Robeson, has announced additional funds for local authorities following further discussions with COSLA, taking the total funding for councils to the highest level on record. Council's General Review grant will be increased by a further £17.7 million for 2024-25, the Deputy First Minister wrote in a letter to council leaders. In addition, she also committed to pass on in full to local government the £45 million consequentials that are expected as a result of the UK government's recent announcement on ring-fenced adult social care funding in England. This will be dependent on the funding being confirmed as a net consequential through the UK government's spring budget. This funding will be provided alongside any consequentials that are received for increased teacher pension contributions. Taken together, this represents an additional £62.7 million for Scottish councils to use to best meet their local needs and priorities. This will mean that the £147 million in funding allocated for the council tax freeze will be wholly additional funding. The letter reiterates that the funding is conditional upon local authorities agreeing to freeze council tax. The letter also sets out that the island's cost of living fund will be increased by the figures dropped off there, I'm afraid, but it will be increased despite the Scottish Government funding offer. Argyll and Bute Council, in setting its budget today, has voted to increase council tax by 10%. Councillor Gary Mulvaney, policy lead for financial services on Argyll and Bute Council, said the Scottish Government funding settlement available to the council on the basis of a council tax freeze would have meant cuts to services. Decisions made today keep services going for our communities. Decisions made today keep investment going in Argyll and Bute. Argyll and Bute's future, forgive me. William, I'm kind of thinking, if I was a council member and I feel that I've got to increase my council tax, then along comes this news from Shona Robeson, which says there is money in the pipeline, but it's going to depend on consequentials coming from Jeremy Hunt's spring budget. But if you freeze council tax, then that money will come to you and it won't be, you'll get it in its entirety. But what do you think councils are going to be thinking up and down Scotland with this recent news?
Well, this latest funding settlement from the Scottish Government has been after they've been speaking to COSLA, who oversee all the local authorities, about it, and particularly the £62.7 million has been identified as the shortfall that needed to be fixed. And so it appears that this has been done, and it is, I think, likely to be seen as a consequential. I don't see why it wouldn't be, but nevertheless, there is still the contingent risk that it might not be seen as a consequential, and therefore that would be a problem. So if I were a councillor, I would think that things would be pretty tight, but I would have thought that the statement that the council tax freeze was fully funded would be taken with more than a grain of salt after that, because clearly efforts are being made to make sure that this happens. Needless to say, if Scotland had full control over its finances, we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. And that's the truly irritating thing. Not all councillors who are thinking about that will share that view, of course, but nevertheless, it's something that if I happen to be a councillor, I would be thinking.
Thank you, William. And the voicemail tells me that the missing figure that had dropped off our auto queue was, so the letter also sets out that the island's cost of living fund will be increased by £4 million. Just a little bit more, the Scottish Government in the past has been criticised for not passing on consequentials fully to, I think, was it to farmers? Is that right?
That was, yeah, various sort of nuanced times when, yes, and in a sense, they're leaving it to the councils to do something different with the consequentials in this case, because in England it's ring fenced. In Scotland it won't be. It'll for the councils to do what they like. So that's not quite the same thing as what you were asking about, but every case is slightly different, I reckon.
No, that's good. I'm happy for people to answer a better question than the one that I can formulate. So the next item is one of the most active and largest people smuggling gangs operating in Calais has been dismantled with 19 arrests by German, French and Belgian police after a year-long investigation, Europol has announced. Operation Task Force Wave, involving 600 police, arrested the leader of the Iraqi Kurdish gang and 5 of the main organisers in Germany, where the people smuggling operation was orchestrated, police said. The swoop on numerous addresses comes less than 2 months after 5 people drowned in Wimereux, a resort close to Calais, attempting to cross the channel during freezing temperatures in early January. Among the arrests were 5 high-value targets or people in controlling roles in the gang. Details of the investigation also lifted the lid on how people smuggling around Calais has been so successful, with almost 30,000 men, women and children crossing the channel last year, despite the risk of death. Cheap dinghies were imported from China and transported into Germany through a complex operation involving surveillance by the gangs and rest areas in Belgium, where the smugglers would wait with the boats until given the order to head to Calais. Premises in 26 locations were raided in Germany, with 24 boats, 175 life vests, and 81 flotation devices for children seized, along with 13 outboard motors, 14 engines and almost 60 electronic devices and a number of firearms. The suspects were all based in Germany and are being detained under Belgian and French judicial orders. Europol said the investigative activities, initiated at the end of 2022, identified the structure and modi operandi of this large criminal network, made up of Iraqi and Syrian nationals of Kurdish origin. Europol said that suspects had set up their own logistical infrastructure with specific branches in charge of organising delivery of large amounts of nautical equipment from China and into the EU via Turkey and on into France. Drivers typically transported 8 boats at a time with a forerunner car, scouting the route through the journey to avoid police detection. The drivers were located in rest areas in Belgium before they drove to the equipment to a spot at the time of departure, said Europol. In a detailed 4-page statement, Europol said small boat smuggling activities had increased on the English route since 2019 and are becoming increasingly violent while adapting activities and crossing points. William, I'm struck by it when I read this item earlier on that there was no mention of post-Brexit UK in this Europol sting, but it does then also make me think, is the Westminster Conservative government correct when they say that it should be countries like France and Germany that stop the gangs rather than the UK have to deal with the people in the small boats?
Well, the people smuggling criminal activity is going on in Europe, and therefore it's for Europe to look after. Um, I actually agree with the UK government when it says that the small boats need to be stopped. I just disagree about the underlying situation, because I believe it should be stopped because it should be rendered unnecessary. And certainly not something that asylum seekers would want to contemplate, because I would want there to be, in collaboration with um, a robust asylum seeker system where we can determine who comes to the UK, possibly before they even have to cross the channel, and have a way of the ones we don't accept, then maybe somebody else can accept. It needs to be a much more integrated overall system of asylum seeking, in order to stop this sort of nonsense where people are risking their lives and where we are thinking in terms of sending them to Rwanda and ridiculous things like that. Our asylum system needs a complete overhaul, and it's not just us. We need to do it in collaboration with other countries. I'm quite glad to see what's happened here, because I do think that people smuggling is an operation that should be quashed. We just need to do something to make it unnecessary, to really take it out the game, I would say.
So just to clarify, you're suggesting that these gangs which have just been busted is another symptom of the UK's lack of safe routes for asylum seekers, and if the UK government restored that, then that would lessen the need for these gangs and for the small boat crossings.
I would say so, yes.
Okay, just to make sure that I was actually following you there, William. Thank you. So the next item is a second Alabama IVF provider has announced that it will pause its in vitro fertilization treatments today, just days after the state Supreme Court ruled in a first-of-its-kind decision that embryos are extrauterine children. They said, "We have made the impossibly difficult decision to hold new IVF treatments due to the legal risk to our clinic and our embryologists," Alabama Fertility said in a post to its Instagram account. They continued, "We are contacting patients that will be affected today to find solutions for them, and we are working as hard as we can to alert our legislators as to the far-reaching negative impact of this ruling on the women of Alabama." The clinic said it does not plan to close entirely and urged people to check back for advocacy opportunities. Alabama Fertility is at least the second IVF provider to announce that it would suspend its IVF procedures after the University of Alabama at Birmingham Wednesday said it would pause treatments in the wake of the court ruling. A spokesperson for the university, the largest healthcare provider in the state, said the institution is saddened that this will impact our patients' attempt to have a baby through IVF, but we must evaluate the potential that our patients and our physicians could be prosecuted criminally or face punitive damages for following the standards of care for IVF treatments. The Alabama Supreme Court ruling stemmed from two wrongful death lawsuits brought against an IVF clinic after several people's frozen embryos were accidentally destroyed. The clinic pushed back against the lawsuits, arguing that Alabama's Wrongful Death of a Minor Act did not apply to frozen embryos, but the state Supreme Court ruled that the act does indeed apply. The central question presented in these consolidated appeals, which involve the death of embryos kept in cryogenic nursery, is whether the Act contains an unwritten exception to the rule for extrauterine children, that is, unborn children who are located outside of a biological uterus at the time they are killed. Alabama Supreme Court Justice Jay Mitchell wrote, "Under existing black letter law, the answer to that question is no. The Wrongful Death of a Minor Act applies to all unborn children, regardless of their location." IVF patients and advocates have vigorously opposed the ruling, which they say did not deal with the vast practical implications of legally recognising frozen embryos as people. Doctors at Alabama Fertility told The Guardian earlier this week that the ruling threatened to upend several steps of the IVF process. William, I don't know if you maybe feel the same as me, but I kind of felt like I was reading out a passage from some kind of dystopian sci-fi novel there when I was reading out that news item. And yet at the end of the day, what it's going to mean is just sadness for people who are struggling to conceive a family. Have you been able to keep up to date with this or delve into this item?
I've had a look at it. It is very sad. And you use the phrase there, black letter law, i.e., everything is in black and white. But these matters go beyond black and white. They're all nuanced and they all are complex. And you know, it's almost like using the law really to destroy people's happiness, which isn't really what the law should be for. So I think this stems from the same line of thinking, and a lot of it, I know some of the sort of case studies around it have been based on sort of biblical principles. People who say an embryo is a person also tend to be on the anti-abortion side of things. The real sort of eyes for them, if you like, that they're driving the anti-abortion laws in various states in the US. And this, if you like, could just be collateral damage. But I don't at the moment. That seems to be the way it's going increasingly in America, and that is very sad, and it is dystopian. And who knows what the future holds? And that's really all I can say about it.
Thank you, William. A long-lost manuscript of a classic Scottish novel has been acquired by the University of Strathclyde's archives after it was donated by the author's family. The Dear Green Place by Archie Hind was published in 1966 and is widely regarded as a masterpiece of Scottish literature. Hind also published numerous plays and short stories, as well as many reviews and articles, but had no other novels published in his lifetime. A second novel, For Sadie, remained unfinished at the time of his death in 2008, although it was published posthumously in complete form. However, The Dear Green Place secured his reputation as a writer and won Hind several awards, including the Guardian Fiction Prize and the Scottish Pen Frederick Niven Award. The typewritten annotated manuscript runs to more than 200 pages and was donated to Strathclyde's archives by Hind's family after one family member was clearing out while preparing to move abroad. Correspondence with family, friends, colleagues and publishers, photographs and scrapbooks have also been donated. They include letters between Hind and the late writer and our artist Alistair Gray, a close friend of his. The manuscript and other material will inform a planned series of events and publications leading up to Hind's centenary in 2028. The papers will require to be processed, catalogued and digitised before they are made available to researchers. The donation will ensure that the collection is preserved for future research. Dr. Eleanor Bell, Senior Lecturer in English in Strathclyde's Department of Humanities, is leading the project. She said while The Dear Green Place is widely regarded as one of the most important Scottish novels of the 20th century, few resources exist on Hind's work. The manuscript of his famous novel has often assumed to be lost, or perhaps burned, so imagine our excitement when we discovered that not only was the manuscript still in existence, but also many other significant papers relating to his life and work. She went on to say, as implied by its title, The Dear Green Place demonstrates a deep connection with, as well as a deep love for, the city of Glasgow. However, its vision is far from romantic. I have been teaching The Dear Green Place for many years as part of my undergraduate module on the Glasgow novel. One of the most compelling aspects of the texts for students is that it tells a story of a writer struggling to write his own Glasgow novel. Up until now, I've never been able to tell the students very much about Hind. It has therefore been a real privilege to spend time with Archie's family over the past year and to find out more about the context of his life and work. William, this landmark 20th century novel, which was only the only novel that was published in Hind's lifetime, have you read it by any chance, The Dear Green Place?
I haven't. I should, shouldn't I? Because for an aspiring writer, an autobiographical or semi-autobiographical novel about a novelist struggling to complete his own novel would really fit the bill. But it's great to have a good news story to see it found and archive given to the archive of the university by the family, and it looks from the story as if it were almost just pure chance that they happened to make the connection that they did with Dr. Bell and make this happen. Otherwise, probably the papers would have been transferred to another box in another house, or indeed, as they thought, burned. And it seems to have influenced quite a few people, not just Archie Hind's close friend Alistair Gray, but also James Kelman and William McIlvanney, and no doubt many others. And so it is indeed a landmark novel, and it's great to see it where it should be and available along with the surrounding correspondence for study.
And just as you say, it's good to see it where it should be, because I was quite pleased to hear that it didn't go to the National Libraries of Scotland in Edinburgh, because no harm to them, but it's about Glasgow. But even then, I thought if it was going to stay in Glasgow, then it would have probably been more likely to go to Glasgow University. So is this just a wee heads up as to just how well known Strathclyde University is for Scottish literature?
Yeah, well, different universities have their strengths, and I believe Scottish literature is one of Strathclyde University's strengths. And Dr. Bell was already teaching the novel as part of her course. So she is the expert in Archie Hind, and it's in the right place in that sense as well. Sometimes it's down to who your academics are as much as what your departments do, I guess.
Yes, and just I should maybe say just for the record that I haven't read anything by Mr. Hind, and I didn't know really anything about him at all either. So hopefully this means he's going to get the recognition he deserves and becomes better known to a wider readership. But that's about all we have time for tonight. William, thank you. Did I get your name right all the way through this time?
You've got my name right consistently, and I'm sorry for any garbled answers I gave.
No, your answers were great. So that's got to be a first. Anyway, thank you once again. I'll let you go and for the rest of the evening. So, but before I do go, I just want to remind you, here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you could afford at least £5 a month or anything at all, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We're now just under £1,000 short of our £10,000 target, and although the pressure has been eased, we really do need to raise that last £1,000 as soon as possible so that we can pay our bills and focus on securing the future of independent broadcasting for Scotland by growing our subscriber base and regular funding. But once again, thank you to William Duguid for joining us again, and thank you for watching us. And we'll see you on Sunday with the full Scottish. Goodbye.